The Bob Murphy Show, episode 466.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. Today I am talking once again with Dr. Keith Smith, who's a board-certified anesthesiologist, but you folks probably know him as the co-founder of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. I've had Keith on in various podcast platforms several times over the years, just letting him tell his story about him doing this revolutionary thing in healthcare where they post the prices of the services they offer so people know ahead of time how much is this going to cost. And that's really a scandalous thing in conventional healthcare circles. So I have him on to talk about that, but specifically, Keith recently testified to Congress on these matters. And so that's what he's going to be talking about, his experience there. And he was sitting next to Mark Cuban, in case that intrigues you. You want to learn more? Well, you're just going to have to listen to Keith tell the story. Here we go. Well, Keith, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show.
Thanks. Good to be with you again.
Yeah, always a pleasure to have you. So we recently had Matt Ort on, who's the executive director of the Free Market Medical Association. And then I was sending you the episode to say, hey, here's Matt's thing. And then you said, oh, yeah, and I was just testified for the Senate, and that wasn't on my radar at all. So that, folks, is why we have Keith here. So I guess first, how did that happen? Like, you remember the timeline in terms of when someone reached out to you?
Yeah, I received an email and then a kind of a vetting call from the staff of Senator Rick Scott, who's the chairman, apparently, of a committee called the Committee on Aging, the Senate Committee on Aging. And they wanted to hear about the story of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, and they were planning a hearing that it turned out was going to be called the shoppability of medical services. I was plus minus about accepting the invitation when it actually materialized until I found out that Mark Cuban was also invited. And Mark Cuban and I have corresponded off and on for the last 2 or 3 years because his completely transparently priced cost plus drugs was just an earthquake in the industry. And he has a lot of respect for what we've done with our transparent pricing at the surgery center. So when I found out he actually was going to go, I had to go. So, he and I both testified with a couple of other.
Can I stop you? Just make sure I'm getting. Originally, are you saying you weren't sure what the purpose of the panel was until you heard he was on board, or do you just mean like, well, it's a pain to fly up to Washington, and I don't know if I want to deal with all that?
No, the latter. I testified before the House years ago, and I keep swearing that I'll never go back to that city. But Cuban's presence was a good enough reason to attend.
Okay, all right. So I just wanted to clarify what you meant. Okay, great. And then can you unpack, just full disclosure myself here? I didn't know he had anything to do with that. So you're saying that was an earthquake. Can you just elaborate a bit on that, just for those of us who don't even know what you're talking about?
Yeah, Mark Cuban, from what I've been able to tell, ideologically, is very hard to pin down or predict. And I think that is not an issue for him at all. He's actually very fun to talk to. So one thing I think that I have discovered about him, though, is like a lot of people that have a conscience, he's motivated by injustice. And he sees the secret pricing and the fleecing of the American people and employer health plans by the pharmacy benefit managers as truly a crime. If I'm not mistaken, what motivated him to start this online retail pharmacy with all of the prices displayed was a fellow who wound up buying a company that controlled many of the asthma inhalers, who then jacked the price up so that basically no one could afford them. And I think if I remember right, the timing was that's what lit his fuse when he decided to just put his money down and open this pharmacy, really with no indication, I think, that he was going to be able to profit from it. I think he has. So yeah, it's called Cost Plus Drugs, and all of the prices for the drugs are on the website. They're very competitive prices, and I think he's enjoying himself. I think that there's a part of him that feels obligated because he's in a position to disrupt the ripoff, to disrupt the cartel, the pharmacy benefit managers in particular. He's enjoying himself.
Well, yeah, I mean, this are recurring conversations, Keith. Like, just as an economist, I'm trying to understand, like, what are the barriers to entry or whatever? Because, since you did the surgery center of Oklahoma and you're telling these anecdotes about people that, fly in, they get their procedure done, they stay in a hotel for a week recovering, and then they fly back, and that's still lower than what their out of, deductible thing would have been if they had done it home. And so you just wonder, like, how come there's not hundreds of these things popping up all over the place? Like, this is such a thing, So it makes sense to me that, an entrepreneur and a guy who likes to hear business ideas and stuff like that would realize this is crazy. This is wide open with these huge margins. Like, somebody should come in there and whittle those away.
Yeah, and I think he's very good at making money. That's pretty obvious. But there's a missional part of this for him that I think is substantial. I really am not 100% sure that he cared whether it was profitable or not. He meant to right a wrong, and that's how I've interpreted my conversations with him.
Okay, so you've known him for a while. You heard he was going, and so then you're on board. So who was it? Like the people holding the hearing, their point was, what do you think they were trying to achieve with this?
I think that Senator Rick Scott, having been in this business, if I remember right, he founded Columbia Healthcare, which later merged with HCA Healthcare. So he knows the ins and outs of this industry. But I also think he's also washed his hands of it. So he's now in a position to evaluate it in a pretty cold way. And as prices continue to soar with increasing government intervention with sporadic quality, once he knew about our story at the surgery center, that I think was part of what compelled him to have this hearing. I can't help but think, though, that the Mark Cuban story was also a real good reason to have this hearing, to show the American people that medical services can actually be shopped. You can have a competitive marketplace. The prices can be reasonable, and paradoxically, the quality is higher when the prices are reasonable. The other person on the panel of interest to me was the fellow that runs CalPERS, CalPERS. So that is an entity that controls basically the health plan for all of the California employees, people that work for the state of California. And I think they also control the health services for some of the counties also in California. But they took a look years ago at how much, for instance, was being paid for hip replacement by their self-funded health plan. And they just decided they were going to instruct all the hospitals in the state that this is the median and the mean, and this is what we're going to pay. And if any employee wants one that, is triple that, then they can pay the difference. And what happened was exactly what you would predict. They are such a large entity none of the hospitals could tolerate the loss of that business or revenue. So they all lowered their prices. I mean, they all matched that maximum price that CalPERS was willing to pay. And that's called reference-based pricing, where there's the buyer basically says, this is all I'm going to pay, and you need to accommodate that. My friend Adam Russo in Boston, who's an ERISA lawyer, calls that the gateway drug to the real thing, which is a direct contract. Mark Cuban and I had a good laugh about that. The proper thing is not for the buyer to, I think, inflict a price on the one selling the service. The proper way for a market to work is for the seller of the service to display, their price. And this is, this is a service that I provide, and here is the price attached to it. And then the buyer can shop and decide. And I think once Senator Rick Scott realized that this was going on, and not only is this going on, but it is a growing movement that's spreading in the United States. I think he felt compelled to do his part to see to it that story was told. When I agreed to travel to Washington, D.C., the other opportunity that materialized is I was invited to address the weekly Republican senator lunch. And so there were 43 Republican senators there, if my count was correct. I was introduced by Oklahoma Senator James Lankford, who's conversant with what we've done at the Surgery Center of Oklahoma. And I spoke for 10 minutes, and they asked questions for 20 minutes, and it was pretty lively. And I had an opportunity to basically tell them the only way that they could help this movement was to do nothing or repeal some of what they've done. I've laughed through the years that I remember some story I read about Murray Rothbard at the Cato Institute when they decided they were going to be an entity promoting good government policy, and he said there's no such thing. And I think there is. I think it's good policy is a repeal of prior policy. And so whenever anybody in government asks me, what can we do to help? I think they can do something to help, and it's to undo some of what they've done. And that's the kind of conversation I had with them. I let them know from the very beginning that I accept no federal payments. I haven't since we opened the surgery center, and never intend to. So I think I distinguish myself by others in the industry that go to Washington who beg for crumbs and favors, and I was certainly not there to do that.
Well, that's great stuff, Keith. You talked about the quality going up, and I wanted to ask you to elaborate. So here I'm reading from your testimony, and you say, let's see here. Well, just to give people a sense, let me just make sure the listeners who haven't seen you interviewed before understand what we're talking about, and then I'll get to the quality question. So this is a few paragraphs in. You say, we were excluded, you talk about the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, we were excluded from insurance at the start, which meant that we had to be creative. We started quoting patients all-inclusive prices. It was simple math. What fee did the surgeon think was fair? What was the fair anesthesia charge? And what was the time and materials-based charge for the facility? It turns out that our prices were usually less than the patient's in-network deductible and copay. Today, our total charges are still only 1/6 to 1/10 of what large hospital systems near us charge, and even more extreme price discrepancies are routine. In fact, we recently performed a tonsillectomy on a child for $38.75 after the family had been quoted $72,000 by a Dallas area hospital. Our prices remain half of what Medicare pays hospitals and less than Medicaid payments to hospitals for the same procedure. Okay, so folks, that's just to give you an idea of some of the cost savings here. And then a little bit later, you said, Keith, when I want you to elaborate on this point, price matching in the industry has had a deflationary effect even on the price gouging facilities as they stand to lose business and patients if they don't compete. Our model also increases the quality of care because physicians with unpredictable outcomes shy away from this tightly disciplined space. The good surgeons would rather perform a surgery at my facility due to better conditions and the higher pay they receive. So can you just fill in that a little, or elaborate on that a little bit? Like, why is it that the mediocre surgeons don't want to do this model?
Well, it stems from the very paradoxical relationship between price and quality. So in a normal market, I think you get what you pay for is mostly true. In this dysfunctional industry, it's actually the relationship between price and quality happens to be inverse. The reason for that is high prices in a region typically mean that there's not much competition going on. If there is competition going on, then prices tend to fall and the quality tends to improve. So in areas where there's a lot of competition, prices are more reasonable, and in areas where some hospital system has a complete monopoly and has hired all the physicians there, they're going to be busy. They can charge whatever they want, and they don't have to be any good. So in my world, if you don't know what you're doing, you can't put a price on it. If there's a lot of uncertainty attached to whether or not a tonsillectomy or a gallbladder removal or a shoulder replacement or a cochlear implant is going to go well, then it's difficult to put a price on that. And so, if someone is willing to say, a gallbladder removal is $6,836, that means there's very little uncertainty associated with that procedure and its outcome. And that generally means they know exactly what they're doing when they can attach a price to it with confidence. So that's what I mean by that. If a surgeon is terrible and the patient has traditional mainstream insurance, everybody's happy with that because when the patient goes to the intensive care unit and unexpectedly, the hospital makes more money. So hospitals make more money when things go wrong with traditional insurance. In my world, if something goes wrong, then it better be a pretty rare event, or that individual or the proxy buyer for that individual, whether it's a cost-sharing ministry or a self-funded employer, they're not going to buy from me anymore. So we don't have patients at Surgery Center of Oklahoma because we are in some network. We have patients there because patients want to be there. And if we do a terrible job, there aren't any patients there. So we're right up against market discipline. And if there's a surgeon that wants to come work at my facility and they're not good at what they do, I can't let them get near patients at our facility because it's just reputational destruction. And it's also financially very risky to have someone performing a surgery that they don't know how to do.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad I asked you to elaborate on that because that makes sense. But I thought that's what you were getting at, but I wasn't sure. And also, even there, I'm just thinking through this industry is just so, bass backwards that it's where because one might say, well, I mean, even in the big sector, like with Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and people are going to a huge hospital network, doesn't Blue Cross want to save money? But actually, I don't know that they do, because if Blue Cross negotiated something and then gave their executives huge bonuses or something like that, probably would look criminal, or I'm sure there's all kinds of regulations and like it's just not a normal market. It's so regulated and everything that I don't know that it would be in Blue Cross. Like you were saying on a previous one, what they want to do is like negotiate and be able to show like employers that use Blue Cross for their employees, oh, hey, before we talk them down, look at the savings we got you, and so on. But that's not the same, Anyway, you get what I'm saying. I think that there still is a margin where it's in Blue Cross Blue Shield's interest for people to see the bill that is actually paid and think, if I didn't have insurance, I would have been bankrupt. So there is a sense in which Blue Cross actually still wants there to be sticker shock just, an even more crazy number that they talk down to a number that's still crazy. Like, you still need Blue Shield or else you're dead with the conventional hospital bill.
That's right. Yeah, I made a video called the $100 aspirin that's on YouTube to explain why insurance companies do not want cheaper and better, because they prefer a very large bill from a hospital to which they can apply a discount. And then they charge the employer plan a commission for the discount they've achieved. Keep in mind that the discount is completely fictional because all of the arrangements had been pre-negotiated in a contract between the carrier and the hospital. So these fictional discounts are never really fully explained to the self-funded employer. And the hospital is happy to provide discounts because they need all this red ink to justify the fiction of their not-for-profit status. There was just open laughing in amongst the legislators that I was around, and they were laughing about this phrase "not-for-profit" because they all know what it means, and they were saying it out loud and cracking themselves up. It means don't pay tax, and so they know what not-for-profit means. It means don't pay tax, and I didn't get the feeling that there would be much sympathy for the carriers or the large hospitals on Capitol Hill when I was there.
You said they did understand that, or they didn't?
I think they do understand that they're being scammed. I think that the legislators understand that the whole not-for-profit thing is kind of a scam, and they don't pay tax. So there wasn't really no sympathetic remarks by anyone on either side toward the big hospitals or the carriers. There were some sympathetic remarks about rural hospitals, and I sympathize with rural hospitals because they've been victimized by the big city hospitals that are so heavily subsidized by Uncle Sam. And I had some thoughts for how they could address that. But yeah, the idea that the industry is one of the favorite cronies of the legislators it wasn't hidden at all.
Folks, let's take a break from the action to talk about the Tuttle Twins. Now, I'm sure you've heard of their best-selling book series aimed at younger children, teaching them the principles of liberty and free market economics, but they also now have an academy that caters to slightly older students who grew up on the books and then want more content. And so, as you can guess, they had me do an economics course, and I will say there's material in there that you won't find elsewhere from me. So if you have a student, junior high through high schoolish range, who loved the Tuttle Twins as a youngster, then I highly recommend that you check out this academy, not just a course from me, of course, but from plenty of other people that you know and love. There's a special Black Friday deal going on, and to get the special prices available there, you have to go to the link contained at the show notes page. So check it out. You're going to find great value, lots of material there for your children to enjoy. Or you can give it as a gift to that special kid in your life who's not your child. Okay, let's get back to the show. Okay, so I guess generally you're going into one of the questions I was going to ask you here is overall, you gave your thing. Was there any pushback to you in particular or just the other people on the panel? Or, did any of the senators take the opportunity to read a prepared statement that kind of undercut the points you were making, or was it pretty straightforward?
That was one of the astonishing parts of the experience. And afterwards, one of the staffers there asked me if I was surprised by anything, and I said, "Yeah, there was no pushback." And he said, "There's no pushback because you're kind of a can of worms." He said they don't want to have a conversation with someone who's offering services at half what Medicare pays hospitals and making money with no fingerprint of government on your business whatsoever. So that was just a conversation I was told that at least the Democrat side of the hearing didn't want to have that conversation. So there were no questions directed at me by the Democrats, with the exception of the ranking member. I think her name is pronounced Gilliland. She's from New York, and she was very polite. There was nothing adversarial about it. But at the end of my prepared remarks, I made a comment about physicians departing Medicare in greater numbers, and she wanted me to elaborate on that to see what, if anything, could stem the tide of secession, especially from Medicare. But yeah, that was kind of interesting. I'd lay awake at night, 2 or 3 nights before I went up there, imagining how am I going to respond to, Elizabeth Warren, who is on that committee, or someone like that. But they never had the opportunity.
That's great. Yeah, I testified to the Senate, I think just once, for sure, at least once. And I was doing energy when I worked for an energy think tank, and I was very free market. The stuff I was saying was against the carbon tax and stuff. And then I think it was Dianne Feinstein. Pretty sure. And so she got ready, and it was she kind of just threw out some generic, like, oh, you guys get funded by energy company. You know what I mean? Like, there was nothing specific. And so I kind of read the sigh of relief that, okay, her staffers didn't dig up anything in my testimony. They're just throwing generic insults. Okay. So I relaxed. But it was not friendly from her. But yeah,
I had visions of Tom DiLorenzo and Jeffrey Herbiner and Joe Salerno testifying before Ron Paul's banking subcommittee. And those people were not kind to those 3 gentlemen.
Well, yeah, I can understand the difference, though, that here you are giving quality medical care to people for affordable prices. So you're a very sympathetic person, whereas like some academic economists there in favor of, banks or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, I know they weren't, they actually were populist, but I'm just saying I can see why it'd be easy to attack them as these crazy free market guys who want to deregulate banking or whatever, whereas you're giving people tonsillectomies at 1/6 the price. So who could be against that?
And I made the point at the lunch that, this is not ideological. It's not even partisan. I've had so many patients come to Surgery Center of Oklahoma who will tell me in so many words that ideologically they could not differ with me in a stronger way, but they can't argue with cheaper and better. So, Americans are shoppers. If they have sticker shock, which only about half the people in the United States do, but if they have sticker shock, ideology goes out the window. They're looking for what they perceive subjectively as value.
Well, I think a lot of people watching this right now are, thinking, oh, the obvious question that Bob should be asking is about, the scaling down the Obamacare subsidies. And speaking of sticker shock, a lot of people are astonished seeing rolling over their plans and how much their premiums are going to go up. Do you have any thoughts on that general topic?
I don't have any idea. I know that if what I was told when I was in Washington is true, that the money they're talking about passing out and what they're fighting over is not money that goes to patients. It's money that goes to insurance companies. I watched Sean Rittenauer's lecture in Florida, and he said something funny. He was talking about Occupy Wall Street, and he said, those folks had a point when the banks were bailed out. And he said, after all, they got the gold and we got the shaft. And I think that's absolutely true. In this instance, I think that the insurance companies are looking for the gold, and that's why we're being told the government is shut down at this point. And if all of that is true, and I don't know if it is, but if all of that is true, the honest to God truth is Blue Cross, United, Cigna, and Aetna, and Humana have essentially shut the government down. Without that subsidy, their influence apparently is powerful enough to just shut the whole thing down. So I just say that because that's who we're up against, and I don't think that can be fixed. I don't think there is any hope for this crony mess that's been cobbled together over the years. My goal and vision is just to create an alternative and hope there's a market for it. And I think it's been demonstrated that there is. And as people increasingly purchase from the alternative, the old way will wither and go away. But I think that if the big insurance companies don't get their way and receive these subsidies, they're going to have to deliver on their on what is not a bluff, on their threat. And I think we'll see premiums for people that are on Obamacare plans skyrocket, and probably everyone else's too. Ironically, that will be great for business at Surgery Center of Oklahoma, because as those premiums skyrocket, more and more people will exit, and they won't buy insurance of any kind, subsidized or not. And then they are shoppers. Then they have sticker shock, and instead of sending $1,500 a month to one of those carriers, they can just bank half of that to themselves and prepare themselves for some kind of a black swan event in their medical life, and they'll have the money to do it. And if they want extra safety, they can join a cost-sharing ministry, secular or otherwise. And that I think we'll see more and more of that. So if premiums do skyrocket, and I think premiums have skyrocketed for employer health plans and self-funded employer plans in particular. And we're seeing more and more employers that want to buy from facilities like mine directly and not use traditional insurance.
Yeah, just another anecdote. So I live in Massachusetts, and I have, I'm self-employed, and I have an employer plan that my kids were on, for the Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. And we just got an email the other day, like, oh yeah, we're in negotiations with the UMass system. And it's like everything, all kinds of specialists in the hospitals and pediatricians, they're all in this thing. And they just like, yeah, as of January 1st, it looks like right now that they won't be a network, which is just insane that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts doesn't have the UMass system in network, And so on the one hand, that's nutty, but then I was like, if they let that happen, they're dead, because like you're saying, once people leave because they have to, then they're not going back. And so I can't believe they would let this happen, but apparently I guess they're negotiating and they're used to getting their way. I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and maybe it's just the costs are so astronomical they're charging that this model's breaking down. But what I'm doing is ultimately agreeing with you that, yeah, there's a lot of people that the idea of not having health insurance terrifies them. And here, actually in Massachusetts, they do still have the state level mandate, but it's the kind of thing like once they're forced out because, yeah, these premiums are just too crazy, I think then they're going to realize like, oh, maybe this isn't, so scary after all. And you can find cash practices. And like you're saying, the money you save on what you would have spent on premiums, you can go ahead and put that into all kinds of stuff that, as long as you don't get in a bad situation 5 weeks from now, you're probably going to come out ahead.
A couple of points, almost without exception, when I've read an article about a hospital system and a big insurance carrier fighting, it's theater. It's not real. It's a negotiating tool. That's not always true. Sometimes they fight and they do break up, and a big system does truly go out of network. The other point, there's a cost sharing group called Crowd Health. Dave Smith has been taking them on as a sponsor, interestingly, but they recently had a gigantic gathering, kind of a rally, where everyone was being encouraged to drop their traditional coverage because the question was, I think, valid. What happens to all of these insurance carriers if everyone walks away? And it wouldn't take everyone, but I think they had 100,000 people at this rally, if I remember right. And the chant was essentially to, everyone drop your insurance. Crowd Health is very reasonably priced, and it's essentially a cost share. It's essentially a high deductible. They call it your sharing amount because they can't use insurance terminology. But for instance, a $10,000 or $15,000 exposure, and then when something really awful and expensive comes along, then the group basically pays the other members' bills. And that's the way all the cost shares work. But I see more and more people probably headed that way.
Yeah, I think so as well. Let me ask you one last one here, Keith, about what your testimony. You said, while building the surgery center and changing the market, my mission has now grown. I now also run Atlas Billing Company, which facilitates payment bundles for the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, and is now curating and implementing surgical bundles for many other facilities, now attempting to service price-sensitive buyers and patients. Can you just unpack what that means?
Yeah, so Atlas Billing Company is an entity that was formed to accommodate the buyer who came to Surgery Center of Oklahoma. For instance, a Canadian that's waiting in line flies to Oklahoma to have their surgery at our place, and I envision myself in their shoes as the buyer and being asked to write a check to the surgery center, one to the surgeon, another check to anesthesia, another check to pathology, and I just thought that wasn't very accommodating. So Atlas Billing Company essentially became this clearinghouse to which a single payment could be made. And then Atlas, after the service was rendered, paid the surgery center, the anesthesia team, the surgeon, pathology, whoever else needed to be involved. Not long after I posted the website in 2009, and Atlas started receiving these payments, I was visited by a hospital administrator here in Oklahoma City, and she loved what we were doing. I was skeptical. She wanted to know if there was anything she could do to help me, and was there anything I could do to help her? Could we work together? And it turned out she was authentic and serious. And so I asked her, can I send you referrals? And her eyes got big, and she said, why would you do that? And I said, because there are patients reaching out to me who need care we cannot appropriately provide in an outpatient environment here at the surgery center. Patients that needed robotic surgery, patients had maternity needs, patient had colon cancer, brain tumor. She said, absolutely. And I said, I need you to be able to tell me how much, and then I can put it all together. And she said, this is great, but you have to collect all the money. And I thought, well, okay. And I didn't understand why she asked me that at the time, but essentially she needed protection from the big insurance carriers. And that's one of the functions Atlas Billing Company serves, is it cloaks the hospitals that I work with from the big carriers, who almost invariably in their contracts have a clause that prohibits them from extending a better deal to anyone else than they do to that carrier. and the pricing that I get from hospitals that are kind of putting their toe in the water, imitating Surgery Center of Oklahoma, one case at a time. Atlas, that's what Atlas does. So I'm not as hard on the hospitals as I used to be, Bob, because there actually, I found, are some out there that are really trying to accommodate price-sensitive, sticker-shocked buyers. They just don't know how to do it. And so I'm helping them. I said it at the Free Market Medical Association last year, Atlas is great because what better way to bring the gospel to the hospitals than to pay them to do it? They are, they're receiving, hospitals in Oklahoma City are receiving referrals, patients from Canada and Florida and Maine and North Carolina, Wisconsin, Alaska. So they love it. It's business they would never otherwise see. And increasingly, they're coming to grips with the fact that they are losing business to the extent that they're not able to accommodate the price-sensitive buyer. And so my mission with Atlas is to be those training wheels, to help people who want to copy us and don't know how. And if they figure out how to do their own Atlas thing, they can kick me to the curb and move on. But it's so gratifying to see this movement grow, and I think Atlas is helping that.
Okay, I'm glad I asked you to elaborate because I understood the words you said, but you just going through there and the logic and seeing the incentives and that I can now see that even if there were hospitals that knew the current system's nutty, they're kind of locked in. And well, geez, if we step out of line a little bit too much and the carriers all boycott us, then we're dead. And so, I get what you're saying. This is a way for them to kind of transition out of it slowly. Okay, well, this is all great stuff. Keith, just so glad that what you've been doing is catching on, because this really is something where it's like, understanding how markets work can really make a difference here, because this is just so nutty the way things have been run for the last, 40 years.
Well, it's a very exciting time. The Free Market Medical Association has grown enough that we were able to bring Matt Ort on as our executive director, and he's a powerhouse. He's about 6'6", 6'7", very soft spoken, and just a gorilla. That guy is so powerful in his presentation, and I think he is going to be one of the reasons the FMMA continues to grow even more. And you've been close enough to the Free Market Medical Association to see the influence that kind of the Austrian mindset has had on our organization, and it'll be that way as long as I'm there.
Yeah, as I mentioned, folks, that I did give a talk at one of those events, and I was just blown away by. It wasn't just a bunch of people angry at the government, like it was real serious people there doing, giving testimonies about how they were reforming things and changing lives in their own spheres. And and also, folks, I'll link to, we had Matt on, in case you didn't catch that, a few episodes ago, talking about, his role, like he had been the HR guy at a big company and saved them $5 million by doing all this stuff. So it's really the kind of thing, if you're involved, folks, with a large company that has employees and you just can't believe how much you're paying for health insurance premiums, definitely want to check all this stuff out. Well, Keith, thanks so much, for going and testifying and doing everything you've been doing and coming here and telling us a little update on what's going on in your life.
Well, thanks for having me. It's always good to see your face.
Thank you. And thanks, everybody. We can't see your faces, but we're glad that you're seeing ours, I guess. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
See you, Bob.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.